Let's see if I can talk and work at the same time, talking about asking questions and how that can improve our quality of life, our survival, improve our survival. Asking questions is something Socrates led the world, and Confucius in China is another thought leader on the importance of asking questions, learning. That's what questions is learning. So what can we learn about asking questions? What can we know? How can we know everything? How can we know anything? Seems I just don't know what to say. What do I know? How do I know what to say about thinking and asking questions? How can anybody know what to think about asking questions? How can we be so confident about anything that we can't ask questions? Is it ridiculous that our culture has led us to assume that we should know the answers to anything? Seems Chris Voss, master negotiator, improved, revolutionized asking questions. So one thing I learned from the military was the importance of understanding my ignorance. That it's nearly impossible for me to know the answers, any answer. And I think Einstein said it best. I don't remember the quote word for word, though he said something like, it seems he said something like, if he had an hour to live to save himself, if the world was to end, if his world was to end, it would take about 55 minutes to think of the right question to ask, to come up with the solution he needed. That's feels it doesn't do it justice, the significance. Why do we, this is what I should ask, why do we assume we know anything? If we know anything, How can we be so sure to assume to know anything? And if we're going to make assumptions, isn't it right? Is it false or is it right to make assumptions? Can we be so arrogant to assume that we know the answer to an assumption? Seems should almost be the opposite. What else can I say? What else do I know about asking questions? What do you know about asking questions? Chris says Chris Voss says best questions are labels. Looks like, sounds like, feels like, seems like. And so having said that, it seems to me there's new science that explains some questions negatively trigger the majority. Seems to answer why Socrates, partially answer why Socrates may have been sentenced to death for asking questions. If asking questions can have Socrates sentenced to death, how dangerous are questions? How important are questions if Socrates may have been sentenced to death for asking questions? And if somebody discovered better ways to ask questions, and somebody improved on those, how do we know at all that those are the best skills current, never mind into the future? What else can I say? That's a mouthful. That is a mouthful. What and how questions used to be or misunderstood. What and how questions were accepted, seems they were accepted by society as to help people think, though what was not understood and or accepted by society was what has been known for more than 40 years is what and how questions are especially dangerous because they exhaust the listener. One of the first incidences where what and how questions were used on purpose were specifically used to exhaust terrorists, to make them give up. This has been known for about 40 years. And today, professionals have started using what now questions, not aware it's been always been known that it exhausts the listener. And that today there's now new information. So a more important question, or is it more important, as important, or less important to understand that there's new information? How do we get new information out for broader society to practice better communication skills that can improve our survival, our quality of life? Seems important to inform the public. There's questions can be structured with a label, which makes it a softer landing, an easier land for the listener to absorb, to hear, to understand by using labels like sounds like, looks like, seems like, feels like. And as complicated as it is, one of the hardest things we do is to change our habits. And when we change our habits to use labels, once we've practiced structuring sentences with a label, then we can drop the label. The purpose, one of several, a purpose of using labels is to restructure sentences. Once we've learned to restructure sentences with a label, sometimes we can drop the label. Could this have saved Socrates from a death sentence? Complicated is the complexity of asking questions for Socrates to be sentenced to death, for Einstein to say he needs almost an hour to ask a question that may save his life. Does that explain in part why society tends to avoid asking questions, while in fact Are we not asking appropriate questions or enough adequate questions due to the complexity? How do we encourage early adopters to ask questions? That's a difficult question. Seems to be. Feels it's a difficult question. How do we encourage early adopters to ask more questions? I think that's enough for today. That's a mouthful. Feels like it's a mouthful. Is there more additional, different, not better, different, because we still don't know. It seems bad to say that we still don't have the best information. So if we don't have the best information, it might be important to say that some different information, because we don't know what's best yet. Maybe we do. If maybe different information considers starting an ask with 2 warnings or an apology before label. Chris Voss and his team at the Black Swan Group have recently published new findings of experiments they've run where, depending on the context, person, or situation, they may start a label with 1 or 2 warnings or apology. Apologizing before using, warning before using the label, just to make sure that the counterpart is prepared for a potentially dangerous question. Here's one example of a dangerous question. What and how questions force deep subconscious thinking. So much so, many don't know, those who do use what now questions often don't know that it forces deep subconscious thinking. How deep? In states of alertness, the brain processes up to 400 billion bits per second. An average day to day, about 20 million bits. And at rest, about 10 million bits. And the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, I don't remember, extremely, quote unquote, extremely low. I should look that up. I don't remember offhand right now, but it's something like about 4 bits. That seems wrong. 20 bits, 40 bits. Even if it's 40 bits, that's a lot less than our brain at rest processing 10 million. The brain. This is a perfect example of the importance of staying curious. Is in the Chris Voss style, Black Swan method of asking a question. I would ask if it's ridiculous of you, the audience, to search, research, to ask the internet, encyclopedias, or otherwise, ask how much does our brain process our survival, our prefrontal cortex. The importance of asking questions is staying curious. You shouldn't take my word for it, so why research it? Well, maybe you can take my word for the 10 million bits per second at rest, 20 million bits per second for day-to-day functioning, and 400 billion in states of alertness. Though it might be important to research the prefrontal cortex. Chris Voss talks about that a lot. Him and his team, is how much information our prefrontal cortex processes, though it doesn't come to mind. Another important part about asking questions, if we're truly, genuinely curious, our brain can feed itself oxytocin, serotonin, which energizes us. And so, but if we're genuinely, honestly curious, we get an emotional high by asking questions, energizing us. seems to answer why some, my favorite example, business types, often seem to be addicted to learning different information to improve business, when their survival depends on better information. It seems to me many businesses are addicted to finding different information and deducing what might be better to improve business. How else can business individuals constantly search for different information if not for the fact their brain is energizing them to do so? I think I'll end on that note. Chris Voss has 2 books and more coming. Derek Gaunt on his team has a book called Ego Authority, and I don't remember the third word in Derek Gaunt's book title. I want to say failure. Ego, authority, failure. Doesn't sound right. I challenge you to look up the book. They also recommend Simon Sinek's book on Leaders Eat Last as a book on empathy. And Chris Voss's own 2 books are, his first book is Never Split the Difference. Negotiate like your life depends on it. And his second book is Empathy and Understanding in Business. Check it out.